This is the cover of the book that Linda and I eventually wrote, trying to, there's only two of us, and we want everyone everywhere to be able to have access to this material. So we wrote this book, and it's available in public libraries. And Stuart has graciously purchased a copy for your library as well. The Cancer Center has some as well. So now, I've already told you some of the outcomes about mindfulness practice, but I want to try to see if we can establish some working definitions here that will help you understand mindfulness. First of all, I just came back from Palm Springs, and I have a friend down there, and a lot of people down there golf. Any golfers here? Can I see hands? Any? So how many meditators here? A lot more golfers than meditators. Well, meditation's supposed to be good for your golf too. So maybe that will encourage you, if nothing else will.
How's your golf game?
My golf game, it's improving. This season's going to be the best ever.
Yeah, there you go.
So I'm going to share some definitions or descriptions of mindfulness that have been used to help develop a concept for us here. Intentional, non-judgmental awareness of what is actually happening in each moment within us and around us. So that's similar to John Kabat-Zinn's definition. So we look at the intentional. So I'm paying attention on purpose. We're always kind of paying attention to something, but it's usually what directs our attention. Could be anything. We flit from one thing to another, but here we're going to say, no, we're intentionally paying attention to something. And it's kind of non-judgmental. We just want to see what's there. We don't want to, we're trained a lot in our academic system to be very critical and analytic. We want to push that back a little bit so we can perceive a bit more freshly and in a less biased way before. We don't want to prejudge our experience. So we want to see it, the plain facts. What was that, what they used to say in Dragnet? Just the facts, ma'am? We just want to see what's really happening. And how do we tell what's happening? Through our senses. Through our sense gates, it's sometimes called. Through the sense of touch, hearing, sight, sound. I said hearing. What did I leave out? Smell. And the mind itself is also sometimes considered a register of sensory experience, which is a kind of our inner mental experience. It registers in our minds. So that's how we become aware of what's going on right now. I'm aware of the pain in my right shoulder that if this is anything less than the most stellar golf season I'm ever going to have, it's probably because of that pain I feel in my right shoulder right now. So that's the intentional paying attention to what is actually happening that we perceive through our senses and the attitude, the non-judgmental. What is just happening? A traditional teacher, Thich Nhat Hanh, he's a Zen and also a Theravadan monk who's famous for writing about mindfulness in a very direct and simple, accessible way. He says mindfulness is the miracle which can call back in a flash our dispersed mind and restore it to a wholeness so that we can live each minute of life. If you think about our consciousness throughout the day, where is it usually? What's going on? Just think about that for yourself. What's going on in the mind that, becomes the focus of our lives throughout the day? It's all kinds of stuff, right? I've done all kinds of work in my life. A lot of jobs I've had. I worked construction for a while. Everybody always wanted to have the radio on all day. So my mind often had repetitive lyrics of rock and roll music bouncing around in it. What about your mind? What's going on in there? So whatever's in our mind tends to become our experience. We identify very much with whatever's going on in there. So with mindfulness, we're going to be kind of withdrawing from all that busyness of the mind, the kind of, some people call it monkey mind, this kind of associative, jumping from one idea to another, one thought to another. Some people call it like robot mind. Whatever's in our mind, Calgary traffic, then we get all worked up about that and start making decisions about, what we would do about it if we were mayor of Calgary, or how we would get better snow removal. So there, I'm showing you how the associative mind works. It just goes from one thing to another. So we can live our life like that. Is that really the best use of our consciousness? So how do we not do that? How do we not have that monkey mind? It's not easy. It can become like a habit. Some other descriptions. First one's just very similar. I think we already did that, didn't we? What does it mean to be mindful? This is another Buddhist monk. It means to be fully aware right here, concentrating on what is going on inside. Mindfulness is not necessarily concentrating on an object. So some people are aware that meditation can be done by staring at an image or a candle or something like that. This is not what this is. Those are forms of concentrative meditation. Mindfulness has some components of that, but that's not what it is. Being aware of confusion is also being mindful. We're confused sometimes, and we could be kind of overwhelmed or living in that confusion, but if some part of our mind is able to maintain a bit of perspective and say, oh, I see that confusion. It gives us leverage, a little bit of distance from it, so we can then make choices about it instead of being fully identified with that confusion. If we have all kinds of things coming at our senses, noises, people demanding this and that, we cannot concentrate on any one of them for very long, but we can be aware of the confusion or the excitement or the impingement. We can be also aware of the reactions in our own minds. This is what we call being mindful. So that's very important. We're aware of what's happening and also our own inner reactions to what's happening. Because that space is where we have some possibility of choice. First of all, discernment, what's going on. Second of all, enough awareness to step back and say, what is the appropriate, wise response to this situation? Less reactive, less habitual responding to situations. This is what we call being mindful. I think I just came up with these as elaborations. It could be thought of as an inner technology or a method of acquiring knowledge by paying attention. We're equipped to learn by just paying attention. If we pay attention, we'll learn something. Let's use that to its fullest advantage. There's a lot of poles competing for our attention. And some people are very expert at it, right? Any marketers in the crowd? So people that study how to gain your attention and direct your behavior in certain ways by manipulating your emotions. Why don't we become experts in our own mental apparatus and how our minds work? That's what this is. Mindfulness is a component of an innate system of biofeedback and self-regulation that's conducive to inner peace and well-being. And when mindfulness meditation and mindfulness in daily life are combined with what I'm calling mind training, it can be used to develop salutary or beneficial emotional and mental factors such as equanimity, the ability to stay calm in the midst of very trying circumstances, equanimity, generosity, morality, patience, loving kindness, compassion, wisdom. And in developing these mental factors, our conduct can then be guided by these, what are sometimes called perfections of the heart, or in our culture we often refer to these as virtues. How do we live a virtuous life? Well, having mastery of our mental apparatus is an important part of that. Understanding how that works. So there's mindfulness, which could be happening anytime, like right now. If I were to say, what are you mindful of right now? You could respond. You could say, oh, here's what's in my mind. Here's what I'm aware of. That would be a form of mindfulness at a pretty basic level. Mindfulness meditation however, is a formal practice where you say, okay, I'm going to be mindful, as fully mindful as possible of what's going on. And we train our mind to stay focused in this way instead of being scattered, instead of wandering off on all kinds of journeys, to make it available to what's going on right now in this moment. This also will allow us to recognize our mind as it goes off on all these tangents. The constant stream of conscious and sometimes unconscious or subconscious thoughts, feelings, and habits. Habits. You know, you could think of stress, you could think of maladaptive coping, kind of fancy words. You could just think of them as habits, ways of life that we've gotten to, we execute in a routine way or a habitual way that may not serve us in the best possible way. I think it's obvious what some of those are, but almost any habit taken to an extreme can be detrimental. So I want to just bring you through a very brief actual mindfulness practice if you're willing. So I have this lovely mountain photograph here to help suggest the calmness and clarity that sometimes is used as a metaphor for the mind once you see past all that busyness. You know, the mind is often a metaphor often used as the mind is like the vastness of the sky, infinitely broad and open, whereas the thought, the content of the mind is often like the stormy clouds. If we can see past the clouds, we gain access to this immense capacity of awareness, and that space is capable of holding everything, holding our whole lives, holding our whole history, holding our whole future. Everything is held clearly in the midst of that clear sky, and our mind is like that. Infinite capacity. So sometimes, you know, we feel our mind is overwhelmed by so much busyness, but that's partly because we're right in the middle of it with our sense of ourself. We identify so much with it. If we can use mindfulness to say, okay, I step back from all that busyness and I can see it more clearly. I can see it as it's unfolding. So it can also be cultivated as a way, like a way of life. An inner discipline for learning to meet and enter with awareness the challenges inherent in taking care of ourselves and serving others. So that last is a quote by Saki Santarelli, who's the current director of the mindfulness program at the University of Massachusetts, where this work began with Jon Kabat-Zinn many years ago. I was ahead of myself a little bit. So mindfulness supports good coping versus the alternatives. I know you've heard a lot about coping if you're part of a support group, right? So good coping, characteristics of good coping is, one is that problems seem, that's a pretty kind of a negative connotation to problems. So sometimes just shifting that a little bit to challenges is helpful. It seems less daunting if it's a challenge. It calls us to it instead of making us want to shy away from it so much. Good coping is proactive. And these challenges are seen as opportunities. And in this mindfulness perspective, the opportunity is to learn something about how to deal with difficulty, learn something about ourselves and our own reactions to our lives, and how to be at our best under difficult circumstances. So every challenge gives us that opportunity. And that's a more supportive way to think about problems, you know, that we can engage with them and we have what it takes to find solutions. If you have that mindset, you're much more likely to be able to do it. They're practical, they're relevant to the context. So it's not like a magical thing, it's very down to earth. They're flexible. And the last thing, resilient. There's more where that came from. I'll get through this day, I'll get through this challenge, and I'll actually get better at solving problems and dealing with challenges. So the next time one comes up, I'll have more skills.